Well, I'm up here through an entirely misguided sense of sympathy, which is always an overrated emotion, because some months ago, as Gail was preparing for the seminar, I'm sure I detected a note of panic in one of her communications when she said that, please guys, the deadline is looming and we don't have enough speakers. And then she approached me and said, Colin, wouldn't you just like a 10-minute slot to lead a discussion? And I thought, well, I'll have to play the game. Next thing, I find my name right at the front of the program, and here I stand. So Gail has ambushed me, but I'm nevertheless very happy to be here, and I'm happy to be talking about this contention that I've made, that libertarian seems to me to be a lifestyle choice rather than a matter of public policy. And just in case a message comes across that's slightly different, I speak as a libertarian, a lifelong libertarian. I'm sure I'll die as a libertarian. And I'd also like to just say that I really enjoyed Cecil's presentation. Mine might seem a little bit at odds with what Cecil says, but I hope you will see it as a fruitful difference rather than anything else Cecil. So when Gail did ask me that, the interesting thing that I was genuinely going through a very minor epiphany of sorts 2 months ago, thinking about libertarianism and why I would want to come here. And I think the sociological term is cognitive dissonance. It's a genuine report that I'm giving to you now. I'm not inventing it. I'm not trying to make myself any more interesting than I am. I was going through a period of cognitive dissonance about libertarianism, because since I'd attended the seminar at Sparkling Waters about 27 years ago, in which I loved, in that intervening period, I have never once ever had anyone use the word libertarian to me to initiate any kind of discussion or comment of any sort whatsoever. Now, that could be the circles that I move in. It might be different from you, but it's my personal experience. It has the disadvantage of being anecdotal, but it has the advantage of being true. Not one person, and I would have remembered, has ever mentioned the word libertarian. And when I have initiated a subject discussion using the word libertarian, the subject has spluttered to a halt in no time, and I stopped doing that entirely for many years now. This might happen to many of you when I say I'm going to a libertarian conference, which I hardly ever do anymore. I'm always confronted with the response, what is a libertarian conference? And my friends who say that are anything from brain surgeons to top lawyers, electricians, people, politically aware people, and they will say, what is libertarianism? And then when you try to explain what it is, their eyes glaze over and they lose interest very, very quickly when you try and explain what it is. The most recent response was from a degreed, qualified human being was, isn't that an extremely right-wing political movement? I didn't answer, and I don't mind being labeled as an extremely right-wing political person, but it wasn't that at all. And why I went through this thing of cognitive dissonance is that it genuinely seemed very hard for me to deal with that the thing that was so important in my life, the most important thing, was a matter of such indifference to the entire world outside of my consciousness. And I'm not exaggerating. It was utterly irrelevant. And it's the best part of me. If the people are not interested in that, why are they interested in Colin Bower? That sense that I have was somewhat destabilizing for me to come to grips with. It never occurred to me in those intervening 27 years that there was nothing in the outside world that related to what I was and what my vision of life was. T.S. Eliot talked about something he called objective correlative between an emotion and what causes it. And he famously criticized Hamlet for not being sufficiently informed on objective correlative for the emotion that Hamlet felt. And I felt the same. There was no objective correlative in the world that answered to my internal life. And the more I thought about this thing, the more it seemed to me that not only did nobody seemed to be of interest, but that it was of interest to anyone, but that I never ever heard on the media, in outside fora, anyone leading with the word libertarian or talking about libertarian. Anyone. Now, that might not be your experience. I know if you go onto YouTube or Google and you put in libertarianism, of course you'll read something about libertarianism. I know that. That's a specialized search. But in general. So my sense was that it wasn't so much that I was in a minority of a minority of a minority, but that who I was actually completely irrelevant to the world out there. When I say that nobody in the media ever spoke about libertarianism, of course we know that business leaders, and I'm going to call people in business producers for the moment, which I'll explain in a moment. Producers never talk about libertarianism. I used to listen to Koos Becker and Adrian Gore and wait and hope that they would talk about freedom. This wonderful message of freedom and prosperity that they could talk about, they never did. With the sole exception, in my experience, of that wonderful man, Mr. Glenn Denning. I think Leon will know him. He came to one of our seminars and he had done a high-profile job of taking the Hawks to court over an issue. And he was a very, very wealthy... Glenister, not Glenn Denning. But nobody... but no shortage of Adrian Gore's talking about that most vapid of concepts, leadership, and he spends millions on holding a leadership conference that he invites the Black Tulip author to, but nothing on libertarianism. In fact, I've never heard Milton Friedman call himself a libertarian. Maybe he does, but in my experience in preparing for this, I've never heard Milton Friedman describing himself as a libertarian. He might talk about libertarian concepts, but he will not use the word libertarian. Why? I heard Brian Cantor is a friend of ours, a friend of this group, I should say, who's been to many of our get-togethers, talking about this most useless of all groups, a 2-day summit on job creation. You know, I don't think there's anything more useless than a 2-day discussion on job creation, because it's not jobs that's the problem in South Africa. It's not jobs that are the solution. They are the problem. We've got too many people who want jobs and nobody wants to be productive. It's not jobs that we want, it's productive human beings. And nobody can create them except market forces. Nobody can create a job. And so when Brian Cantor was interviewed, I just noticed, and I wondered why he didn't say, you know what, instead of going to the job creation seminar, I'm going to go and play golf for 2 days and I'll do more to create jobs in those 2 days than if I were attending the seminar. And the one thing that he didn't say is that as a libertarian, why didn't he say that? And of course I know why he didn't say it, because he works for Investec. And if he said that, Investec would ask him to leave. I have no doubt about that. And Leon can put me right with this, and this is not a challenge to Leon, and it's not even I love listening to Leon on the radio, but I don't know that I've ever heard Leon preface anything he said by saying, I'm a libertarian, and so I believe this. But Leon, you can clarify that as you want to in due course if you want to. But, so I never hear in public discourse anything relating to what is most valuable to me. And you can understand where I'm going to when I talk about a personal lifestyle choice. Now let me get to the world of politics. I won't go into that grisly business of my involvement with the DA. I know we have DA representatives here, and I know that they're honorable people, and this has got nothing to do with them. But I got involved with the DA, and the first involvement I had was to be invited to a seminar in Worcester, which was a plenary session of 700 people there. I was very gullible or naive, and in the audience, and a DA minister, gosh, my mind's gone blank, gave a very sanctimonious presentation on poverty in South Africa, with lots of moving slides. They were moving, of starving children, squatter camps. And his point to us all, 700 people, is what are we going to do about poverty? And he earned lots of brownie points for asking the right question. Now, if I had been more courageous at that stage, I would have put my hand up and said, I know exactly what we can do about poverty. And if you give me 10 million rand a year, a 3-year period, I'll do something about it. I didn't have the courage to do that, but I did put my hand up and I said, you know what? I do know what we can do about poverty. Check the Freedom of the World Index, and you will see that there's a direct relationship, which I didn't invent, between prosperity and economic freedom. And if we do that, we'll start to get rid of poverty. It went down like a lead balloon. I never heard again from anybody. Helen Ziller said, thank you, Colin, for that contribution, and that was it. Within a party that stands for kind of justice and prosperity. My subsequent career in the DA confirmed the impression I got that certainly a belief in freedom had very little to do to say for itself in the DA party. I know there was a guy called Tim Harris, I think it was Tim Harris. He wrote a position paper on economic policy in which he recommended that the DA should pour a lot more money into the Competition Commission, but not one reference to freedom in that document. In all the DA documentation that I received, and I had long discussions with Wilmot James, who remains a man I admire, but I found no objective correlative for my belief in libertarianism in that environment. And then finally, what about my work environment? Well, as I started off by saying here, I'm one of the few libertarians I know who worked in a corporate environment, in a dead straight corporate environment job. Because it seems to me that virtually every second libertarian is a software engineer, and every third libertarian is a farmer, and then we have a few who work for NGOs, and those are your libertarians. But I was in the corporate umbrella, right going back to Sparkling Waters. And I never allowed to surface in my mind the fact that I could have been labeled a hypocrite. Because by night, I was a libertarian. But by day, I was a commercial fascist of the first water, believe me. And many people think that business, because we're libertarians, we believe in free markets, is a wonderful, gentlemanly pursuit of competition that brings wonderful rewards to consumers, which, yes, theoretically it does. But believe me, when you're working in a company at risk with private capital in a highly competitive situation, every single day you are paid to destroy your opposition and to limit consumer choice. And like people do in AA meetings, I have to stand up and say, ladies and gentlemen, I did that. Forgive me. But there was a lot at stake. It was my career. It was my children's education. And I did that. And when I say that we were there to destroy our opposition, there was no question about that. We didn't use those words. But every percentage of market share we took away from them, we hurt them, and we helped ourselves. And we would go to government, and I would do it, and try to make cozy deals endlessly to prefer our textbooks to the opposition's, which would have limited consumer choice. At no stage did I ever represent the view that when I spoke to teachers, well, all the books are good. These books, I worked for Juta, these books from Macmillan and these books from Maskey-Miller, they're all good, they have different benefits. I said, no, ours are the best, you've got to buy those. And I did that. And it strikes me that that's no different from any producer in a competitive situation at risk will do the same. And producers are never libertarians. They can't be. That's why I never hear Koos Becker talking about freedom. So this journey this realization has brought me to a kind of culmination of my journey through libertarianism to this stage. I did a little straw poll, conducted a little straw poll of my own on the existence of libertarianism in the marketplace. And I went to YouTube and I put inspiring speeches on libertarianism, and I got the top 3. One was by Rand Paul, and the top 3 addresses on YouTube combined scored 130,000 views and generated 124,000 views. And then I did Milton Friedman, who over a 20-month period, the best of Milton Friedman, 130,000 views and 475 comments. Then I went to Jordan Peterson, okay? And in a 16-month period, Jordan Peterson had got 3.2 million views and an astonishing 8,000 comments. Now, I can't build a whole case on a thing like that, can I? But it just all comes at me that people are thinking of all sorts of other things except the thing that's most important to me, with this wonderful message we have of prosperity and freedom. Why doesn't it set the world alight? But it definitely doesn't. And Jordan Peterson there was a YouTube of his talk on Hard Talk, the BBC program, which is a pretty high-level intellectual talk. I quite enjoy it. And in 10 weeks, he scored 675,000 views and over 5,000 comments. So where I'm driving at, ladies and gentlemen, is that I have been trying very hard to reconcile my lifelong journey in libertarianism with the world as I see it. And now that I'm retired, and I'm not a producer, I thought, well, I'm not a producer anymore. I can afford to be snooty about producers. Until it occurred to me that in my retirement, the only way I can live is from my investments. And my investments are in MTN and in USPS. I'm a very small-time investor, by the way. Don't think anything else. I live a very modest life in Prince Albert. But if MTN can clean off Cell C, why wouldn't I be delighted? So it leads me to the next point that I want to make, is that in huge areas of my life, there is no overlap between my libertarianism and my vested interests as I perceive them. My vested interests are not served by my libertarian belief system. So that has led me to say, well, for me, if it's also irrelevant, the only thing that libertarianism does for me is represent a fully private belief system. And I say, well, why does it even matter? Why does it even matter that I should hold that? And the answer that I give, because I am a libertarian and will remain a libertarian, is that I have a sense of being attached to a much higher truth than nearly everybody else. Okay, I know that sounds very arrogant. I know that sounds the kind of thing that faith devotees will say, but it's the truth. That is what I feel, and that is why I'm a libertarian through and through. Because it seems to me that I see a different world from everybody else. I see this world in stark clarity enough, and it saves me from falling into the trap of believing in governments and believing in municipalities. And that's where that is basically where I stand, and I have to make peace with the fact that large areas of vested interest have nothing to do with my libertarianism. A little anecdote, like most of you, I hate the NHS. I don't know, I say I hate it. I mean, the hate is perhaps the wrong word. But it seems to me all the wrong thing, right? The National Health Service. Except for one thing. My daughter in London works for the NHS. And she's a highly professional, dedicated worker and has got a superb conditions of employment with the NHS. Now, if I were a dictator for a day, this is going to shock you, I think. If I were a dictator for a day as a libertarian, would I cancel the NHS and replace it with a private sector system? I would. But as the father of one single person whose vested interest lies in working for the NHS, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. So where does it leave me? A hypocrite? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that the one thing about being a libertarian, which I think you might have to agree with, I don't know, is that I don't want to persuade or coerce anybody to be anything that they don't want to be. I don't even want to persuade them. If nearly all South Africans want a coercive, tax-based economy, they must have it. That's as simple as that. I don't seek to argue with them. I don't seek to persuade them otherwise. And that's where maybe I'm a little at odds with Sihle, but Sihle, you must know that I admire what you're doing. I can only speak for myself. This all arose when Gail suggested that the purpose of this seminar would be to find out ways of means of affecting public policy. I don't personally believe we'll ever affect public policy in any way, shape or form. It's a lost cause. It's like Hamlet said, taking up arms against a sea of troubles. You know, a sword against a wave achieves nothing. And equally, I don't see any evidence in the world that I engage with of any repercussions of my belief. So thank you for listening to me. That's my short story. It was meant to be a 10-minute slot, and if you have your views, please feel free to express them. Thank you. Francis?
I just want to cheer you up a little bit, Colin, because Jordan Peterson, I would say, he's not an economist,
No.
and he doesn't call himself a libertarian, but he's way along the spectrum towards
Oh, he is. That's why I love him so much.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
him. Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
No, thank you. Trevor?
At least one thing that I would definitely disagree with, libertarian attitudes and approaches to drug legalization have been incredibly successful in the last couple of months. DACA is now legal in South Africa, Canada, and in America. And 30 years ago, that would have been utterly unthinkable at a libertarian conference to say that this was going to ever happen. And I would say it's due to pressure from at least liberal-minded people concerned about its impact on individuals. Just a very quick point. If you look up libertarianism on Wikipedia, as I did recently, you will find that the first line says, this refers to libertarian socialism as practiced in Russia and Europe, but has gradually changed to have a different meaning in America now. So the roots of our word is, very strange indeed.
Yeah.
And we've been arguing this point on LibSer, our Google group, at length. What does libertarianism mean? The best, in my opinion, that we've managed to come up with so far is libertarian describes people who favor liberty and individual choice. That's about as far as we can go. Your comments on that?
It's such a generic term, though, isn't it? I mean, you'd have to be a very strange human being, not nominally, to agree with that. Even if at the coalface you might differ a little bit, but nearly everybody would tend to agree with that, wouldn't they? They might raise...
Absolutely not. I would say 85 to 90% of the world is authoritarian, and about half the people in this room are authoritarian.
Trevor, to respond, but not directly to what you said, I'm just using the word libertarian. I understand it as a moral position. All libertarians are free marketers, but not all free marketers are libertarians, as we all know. That's stating the obvious. And it's because very often free marketers believe in a free market as a means of delivering a good outcome. But I understand libertarianism as an end in itself and as a human value. And that's why it's very precious to me. To go back to your comment, we get lost a little bit in human psychology, because the very same people, I think, will say, yes, they do believe in human freedom, but will still pay their taxes quite comfortably. It's a kind of, to use that word again, a kind of a dissonance in the lives of many people, that they don't follow their views on a very logical way to their conclusion. Yeah, which we also don't do.
Or they need told.
Thank you. It's Rex, isn't it?
It seems to me that there's a consonance between libertarianism and liberalism in this requirement. That is that the liberal, the true liberal will say, I demand liberty for myself, but I equally demand liberty for every other citizen. I demand an equal quantity of liberty for everybody. And that's the generous distribution of the concept of liberty. And I think that the libertarian is indistinguishable in regard to that particular characteristic from the liberal, from the true liberal. Now, if I'm correct in that, then why do you berate yourself for having engaged in business competition? Because when you engage in business competition, you're saying, well, this is the way the game is played. Everybody understands that. And as long as I'm not trying to prevent others from doing the same, my activity is perfectly legitimate. And it is consonant with the principle of libertarianism. That's the way I see it.
You know what? I so agree with you, because having called myself a hypocrite, I then kept thinking it through until I reached a stage of saying, but if you're a libertarian, you are free to pursue your self-interests as you define them yourself. Not so. So the extreme position, and I asked the floor, I don't know, you could be a libertarian and choose to work for the government at a certain stage if it suited your vested interest. And would there be a hypocrisy in that position? I don't know. But I can imagine that could be the case.
Yeah, and if I could say about your story about your daughter and the NHS, if they abolished the NHS tomorrow, your daughter would still have a job.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to take that risk. You know, I drew up a list of groups of people thinking about why I'm such of groups thinking about why I'm in such a minority that I would never try to sell libertarianism to. So I started thinking it'd be a short list, but I would never try to sell libertarianism to civil servants and state employees. I would never try to sell it to politicians. I'd never try to sell it to academics. I'd never try to sell it to professional journalists. I would never try to sell it to the poor, or the middle class, or the rich, or successful business people, or any class of successful people, to people who work in companies and believe in the corporate mission, or to aid workers or any class of professional philanthropists. Now that leaves very few people to sell it to. Now, I know there are exceptions. I know there sits Evo, and he might be a libertarian, although he keeps his cards very close to his chest. I must say, I've never heard him declare himself openly to be a libertarian. But
I think I have.
Okay.
But I don't use the word open. I think what Rex is saying is quite right, that there is really no difference between libertarian and liberal, classical liberal.
Yeah.
And the reason why the word libertarian came around, ugly as it is, it's horrible, is because the term liberal actually got hijacked by the left, in particular in America.
Yes.
Right. So the left started calling themselves liberal when in fact they weren't. Socialists. They're collectivists. They argue for various group rights and so on. They're not liberal at all. And to dissociate themselves from the left-wing state, that's why libertarians, or people who want liberty, individual freedom, started calling themselves libertarian.
Of course, Ron Paul stood for president, didn't he, as a libertarian candidate, but he failed.
And you can make a very simple philosophical argument why libertarian socialists are self-contradictory. There are a lot of people who call themselves libertarian socialists, or anarcho-socialists, if you like. But that is simply politically a contradiction in terms.
By the way, sorry, I'll cut straight to you. In thinking about this, I drew up a 23-point checklist of how to live as a libertarian. I think Trevor has mentioned that he's read a book about that. And the obvious points are don't invite the state into your marriage, and it's nothing that novel or new. But one of the points that I've recommend to you is, in your home, listen to fine music radio all day and don't watch television. It does an enormous amount to balance your life and to make you see good in everything. It is actually a genuine point. I made 6 copies. It's nothing special, but if anybody wants to have a look at my minor animad versions about being a libertarian, you're welcome to have a copy. But sorry, you had a question.
I enjoyed what you said, but I think you've brought conflict in which isn't really there. For example, if you're the executive of Toyota operating in the free market, your objective should be to wipe out all other car companies in the country, that only Toyota is left.
Yes.
And that the whole country will be Toyota only. That's your objective as the leaders of Toyota. While you're doing that, you're entitled to buy your wheel rims from anybody that sells you wheel rims at whatever price. If you've been buying your wheel rims from X for years, you're not going to say X gets a privileged position. If Y comes along and offers you better wheel rims, better quality, better whatever, it'll swap. So the libertarian thing says that if Toyota's aiming to become the sole supplier in the country, you don't prevent anybody else from coming into the market. It doesn't mean you've got to make sure it's spread out, which is one of the problems I have with the Competition Commission. I've actually sat with the leadership of the Competition Commission. I was quite appalled at some of the things they told me. They were saying if somebody's business is expanding rapidly, they must prevent it and they must now give favour to somebody else. That's not the case. If somebody's being successful and all buyers want to go and get their shoes from that shoe shop and their hamburgers from that hamburger shop, that's what they must do until somebody else comes in to compete. I don't see any problem with you being a libertarian and working for somebody who's going to flatten everybody else and take over, as long as you don't do it illegally. And as long as the system allows for everybody else to compete, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that objective.
As long as you don't harness the power of the state to do this.
Yes.
That is where the evil lies. You can get laws passed that favour you and disfavour your competition. Or you can get civil servants to award a tender on that basis. Then you're starting to cross lines that you shouldn't as a libertarian.
It's still a challenge, because that's what companies do all the time, do they not?
Of course they do.
They do, and that's why producers are never libertarians, because they try to harness the power of the state.
Well, that's why I say minimize the power of the state.
Can I just ask a question to either? Is the word individualist or individualism not a better word than libertarianism?
Yes.
I'm not sure. I use the term individual liberty,
Ron's next, I think.
and I think both of those terms are important.
Gail, you should be monitoring this, maybe.
Well,
Sorry for the
I'm
question, so
trying
sorry
to
if I
be
did. Yeah.
libertarian and
Okay.
I know.
Cecily and you and Leon have got a point. Cecily?
Yeah, just a very quick one on that point. It's one of the things when I do go into the weeds a little bit in debates, and I often say that classical liberals and libertarians really aren't pro-business, we're pro-markets.
Yeah.
And there's a very important distinction here. Because business quite often will want to seek to have the coercive manipulative power of the state to write special deals and special concessions for them, in order to cut competition.
But we often perceive to be the pro-business lobby.
And it's an important distinction we need to
We
make.
should dispel it.
Yeah, no, we're not. We're not pro-business.
Yes, I just want to say on the issue of individualism, I don't think it's the same thing at all. You can be an individualist and a despot, and you can be a socialist and a libertarian. All you're saying is you want individual liberty.
Yeah.
But what people do with that, whether they join communes or whether they, religious or whether they greenies or they not or whatever, is part of their liberty.
That's right. Yeah.
So I don't think this idea that libertarianism is individualism is correct.
Ron, I think, had a different question.
Now, careful, Ron, eh? I don't want one of those curveballs about a theocracy or something like that.
Thank you. I relate to a lot of what you've said, and in my, well, I'm not as old as you, in my very few years of being a libertarian, I've never heard the term other than groups such as these mentioned. In the States, however, a lot of it, and I've been in the States for a good amount of time in the last few years. I just wanted to mention two things. Why I prefer dogs is because whether through instinct or self-preservation, they love you more than you love yourself. And I just wanted to point out, you've made a distinction here between human behavior and human ideology. And in my experience, our behavior is motivated by the worst within us, and our ideology motivated by the best within us.
That's so profound.
Yeah, that's very good.
I think and it's the behaviour that matters, not so. It really is, whatever a person is, Christian or Muslim or libertarian, how do they behave? But thank you, everyone. I've taken up a lot of your time, and thank you for giving me a generous round of applause. I appreciated it. Thank you.